Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another incredible conversation with Homeland Security Today. Today, in honor of Critical Infrastructure Protection Month, we're talking about supply chain. We're talking about how to protect it, but also how two wars around the globe will impact the supply chain. We're very, very pleased and honored to have with us several distinguished leaders who are doing research in supply chain management, and certainly security. We're very pleased to welcome Chris Tang, who's a distinguished professor and senior associate dean of international initiatives, and he holds the Edward W. Carter Chair in Business Administration at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have Sundaresh Haragu. Sundaresh is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs in the College of Engineering, Architecture, and Technology at Oklahoma State University, where he's also a Regents Professor and holds the John Hendricks Chair. Welcome to you too, sir.
Thank you for having me, Christina. Appreciate
Excellent. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have Anna Nagorny. She is the Eugene M. Eisenberg Chair in Integrative Studies at the Eisenberg School of Management at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And she's also the director of the Virtual Center for Super Networks, which she founded in 2001. So I am extremely pleased to have these folks join us because they have been doing a tremendous amount of research and are thought leaders in global supply chain management, multimodal transportation systems, network systems from transportation and logistics to supply chain. So we have a true brain trust here with us today. So we're just going to get right into it so we can share with you some of the things that these leaders see evolving as the world gets to be a more dangerous place, and that impacts our global supply chain. So all of us know that there was a horrific terrorist attack by Hamas in Israel a month ago, pardon me. And now we have, in addition to that, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, two global conflicts in important regions of the world. How do you see this generally impacting the supply chains?
Well, let me begin by first expressing my deepest sympathies for the families and friends of people who've been killed both in Ukraine and in Israel and Gaza. I think there have been tens of thousands of people that have died and several thousand more that have been injured. And of course, there are also people still who are being held hostage. So our deepest sympathies to them. But these conflicts, to the extent that they can be contained to the region, I guess there is hope for a better future. But there is also the risk that some of these, conflicts could escalate beyond the region and potentially around the globe. So those are some of the scary scenarios. Hopefully, we don't get there. And I think, our leadership is doing the right thing, getting ahead of the situation and trying to proactively prevent these flare-ups in other parts of the country and trying its best to contain and maybe even eliminate it in the region. But it has huge supply chain implications if this goes on for longer periods or escalates beyond the region.
Well, let me follow up on his comment earlier. I think this week is also the Veterans Day. So I think that we have to remind ourselves, freedom is not free. So I think that we have to also keep that in mind as we go through this discussion. Now, in addition to the wars, you mentioned about the Russian invasion in Ukraine, as well as the Israel-Hamas war. We also have to be mindful that there are potential conflicts in other regions as well. So this is more in the South China Sea. So I think that I'm delighted to hear that that's confirmed. There would be a meeting between President Xi and President Biden on November 15. During the APEC summit meeting in San Francisco. So I think that we are going through a rather turbulent time. So I think that all countries need to keep in mind. I think that there are no winners in wars, and I think that we need to make additional efforts to make peace. Now, coming back to your questions about how would all these conflicts affect the supply chain, in particular, I think if you think about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, well, we know that Ukraine is well known for the breadbaskets of Europe. So they produce a lot of commodities that the world needs. So these are the basic materials like grains, like sunflower oil, also in terms of some other basic ingredients that the world needs that would affect the food security around the world. Now, then, because of the sanctions against Russia, so in that case, there would be no oil and also natural gas than the Europe needs. So I think we've seen it, the disruption in 2022, that in European countries like Poland and Germany, they were struggling how to get the natural gas and also the oil during the winter season. Thank God the winter was not too cold. So I think that the European somehow they manage it. But we can talk about the solution later. Now, but then on the other side, in terms of the situation in between Israel and Hamas, the situation, that one is also that could escalate into a conflict in the Middle East. That we have seen in the past. Whenever there's some unstable situation in that regions, it would really affect the oil prices. That we already seen already. Within 1 month, the oil price has changed from increase from $84 to over $100. So now people actually anticipate if this does not really contain soon, it will actually go up to $150 as well. I'm going to turn over to Anna.
Yeah, I agree with what my colleagues have said. I am very concerned about increases in energy prices and also in exacerbating food insecurity. And if you look at the geopolitical risks, they're obviously increasing. And you look at the geography too, and the trade routes. For example, Israel has gotten a lot of its products from Ukraine in terms of agriculture. They've had a great deal of trade going back and forth. And Ukraine has been a major supplier to the Middle Eastern, North African countries as well. And you look at the geography and so forth. So now what I'm very concerned about, and that's something we've been doing a lot of research with our colleagues at the Cave School of Economics about, and it's also very relevant to what's happening in the Hamas-Gaza versus Israel war. We're seeing some ports in Israel being totally shut down, even like major ports. So a lot of the goods are going to have to be rerouted, just as is happening in Ukraine. Once Russia pulled out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, Ukraine is very agile, very good at adapting. They try to find alternative routes. Obviously, going by rail, by truck is much more expensive, but that is a way of getting some of the grain out. Also, they've been essentially using borders with like Romania along the coast of the Black Sea to try and get the grain out and other agricultural products. So we're seeing disruptions to transportation, obviously, also to production. About 10% of the capable, those who've been trained in Israel, the military, are being mobilized. That's affecting the picking of the produce of agriculture, just like we had in the COVID pandemic. And also various manufacturing sites, they're going to be having a lower number of employees, even at the ports and so on. And I don't know if many know, but Israel is primarily, they're fantastic in semiconductor manufacturing. They're also outstanding in diamond production, okay, and processing of diamonds. A lot of that trade goes between India and so on, and pharmaceuticals, especially generic pharmaceuticals, and medical devices as well. And a major component of their GDP is based on high technology, okay, even twice as high as that of the US, which is something, you know, very, very important. So I think we're going to be seeing over time, especially if we get an escalation, an intensification of this horrible conflict in the Middle East, disruptions to, you know, different kinds of sectors. And we have to be, you know, very cognizant of it. You know, so extremely challenging times, you know, very dark times for the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I think Anna is absolutely right. So if you think about Israel, it's a relatively small country. But they produce very important products. First of all, I think as Anna pointed out, they do produce generic drugs. Now, this company, one of the biggest companies, called Teva in Israel. So they produce the generic drugs for many brands for the US, for the Americans. Also, they also produce API, which is one of the biggest API producer in the world, is active pharmaceutical ingredients. So a lot of drugs, the ingredients actually we need it from Israel. That's point number one. Point number two, they also produce a lot of chips for the defense. So we have to keep that in mind. For the US, in terms of security, national security, we rely heavily on Israel because Israel is a one of the major non-NATO ally of the United States. So US depending on Israel, but also Israel also depending on the US. So for the Iron Dome, for the ammunition, the defense system, over 50% of the components they actually make in the US. Now, then Anna pointed out there is a problem. In Israel, right now, the land border is not as secure, so they have to ship everything by sea. So in that case, there are only two major ports. These two major ports must hold. Otherwise, we'll be in big trouble. So in that case, this is located in Haifa. The other one is in Tel Aviv. So that is in Israel area. So they, Ukraine, relatively speaking, there's some secure land borders. Thank goodness. There's Moldova and also Romania. So in that case, they can, as Anna pointed out, they can ship, avoid it from Odessa, just go out to the Black Sea. They can go along using the rail and also ship it by land to Romania and then ship out to the Black Sea and then go through Turkey and then go to Mediterranean Sea. So that gateway also must be secure. Otherwise, there would be major problems for the food supply to especially African countries as well.
Just to quickly add to what my colleagues are saying, clearly, pharmaceuticals or, precious metals like palladium and neon, wheat. So all of these things are we're going to see some disruptions in the short term. Again, long term, we don't know what exactly, how the war could escalate, and that could have an impact. But there's another aspect. I think what my colleagues pointed out, that transportation is an issue. There's something else happening on the other side of the world, the Panama Canal. They've actually significantly reduced the traffic that's going through them. So on one hand, the Suez Canal, there's issues that are, especially if Iran gets involved, then that's going to constrict shipping there. And then already we are seeing 40% or so shipping reduction in the Panama Canal. So there's going to be delays, in getting products. So although we might have supplies from different regions, getting it to where it's needed is going to be a big issue, I think. So there's a variety of issues, some that are human-made and some that are beyond our control that are impacting supply chain throughout the world.
Yeah, I'm also very worried about food security, even when it comes to Israel. Many of the workers that, would work on the farms were actually migrant workers. They have left because they're fleeing the war. At the same time, a lot of the produce is not getting picked. So Israel is harnessing volunteers to help pick the produce. Okay, Israelis. So you're seeing, the labor issues. We had labor shortages, people are getting sick and dying, during COVID pandemic. And now we're seeing the impacts now because of the wars. And that's happening in Ukraine as well. The farmers and so on, there aren't enough to pick the produce, the lands are being mined and so on. So it's very, very tough. So we need to, realize also that supply chains are not just, producing widgets and high-tech products and very important pharmaceuticals, but, labor is an important component, for freight services, production, for storage, for processing, and so on. And with major mobilization in the military in Israel, they're going to have fewer workers to mine the quartz and do much of the work. And that's challenging. And the security also, the insurance rates are rising, and obviously Israel always, it's been kind of a high risk area, but now, the rates are going way up like they have had happen in Ukraine as well. And the price to consumers of these important products are increasing, and farmers and producers are suffering. And that is very painful for me to see.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, Anna pointed out in terms of this, and my colleagues point out the situation in Ukraine as well as Israel. But also, let's not forget about the implication sanctions. The world imposed sanctions on Russia, but actually has to affect supply chain in other regions as well. So first of all, I think Russia produces a lot of oil and natural gas. Because of sanctions, they cannot ship it to European countries. So if you look at Germany, they need to come up with an alternative plan. So they have to build new ports because before they're using the pipeline, because that one is gone. So they had to build new port in the northern part of Germany, such that they can get the LNG, the liquefied natural gas from other countries, such as Norway or Netherlands. So that also create a new infrastructure they need to put in place. Now, then Russia also did to produce a lot of fertilizers. So when Anna pointed out, oh, maybe we don't have enough farmers, but then not only farmers, even the farmers, the yield will be lower because Russia produced a lot of nitrate-related fertilizers. Without fertilizers, actually, you don't get that much yield. That's why the fertilizers price went up a lot. That's why even in the US, the produce prices, if you go to the supermarket, you find out that how come my pear, my vegetables are so expensive? Because the yield is lower. On top of that, with climate change as well. So I think that we have conflict in Ukraine and Russia and also Israel and this area. If we cannot really de-escalate the situation, if we really amplify the situation in other regions, we will see a lot of impact around the world in terms of food insecurity, inflation, and also food availability. So some basic products. Now, this is the basic products. For the high end, we do have problem related to semiconductor. We already have semiconductor shortages, but then bear in mind, Russia and Ukraine also produce neon gas and argon gas. They use in semiconductor manufacturing. One is using in lithography to print the circuits on the chips. The other one is using a chemical process, the etch process to develop the patterns, right? So in that case, with the shortage of these neon gases, on top of that, then the export control of rare earth minerals from China. So we will see even a bigger challenge to produce chips for our electric vehicles. So therefore, on one hand, we try to fight climate change in the US. On the other hand, we may face other supply chain challenges to actually produce those cars.
It's really good to hear you talk more about the details of what goes into our supply chain, because I think so many people do not think about, the fertilizer that goes into growing a pear and then picking the pear. And, that's very, very illuminating for our audience, but also just really gives a great overview of the scope of supply chain and what it really means. So as you look at the areas that are impacted, and of course, we're all feeling energy, we're all feeling increasing prices from challenges here in the US with inflation and other things, and then we have the wars, and we have a lot happening. And as you said, even climate change and the storms and the increased weather is impacting farmers and others. Do you see possibly attacks on vulnerable parts of the supply chain as a tactic for these increasing escalations? Or do you think that it will be more just general kind of fight?
Oh, I think there will be attacks. I mean, it's been happening in Ukraine, right? Russia has been bombing various ports, warehouses, agricultural, storage facilities in Odessa and other kinds of parts. And that's happening, obviously, in Israel, too. They've had a big natural gas processing plant being bombed. So I think, various production facilities will be targeted. I think ports will continue to be targeted, because you see how, these are intricate, very complex networks, and you need them all to be working well together. Otherwise, the goods that are produced won't get delivered to points of demand. Okay, so that I think is really, really important. And obviously, as my colleagues were saying, because of climate change, you might have different routes. You're going to have delays. That's going to add to the prices too. And that's of great concern as well. And something else when it comes to security and critical infrastructure, also there are concerns about attacks, cyber attacks too. That can affect, obviously, oil distribution, gas distribution, energy distribution, and so on. And the ships need to be able to communicate.
Literally going to be my next question.
And that's happening. I mean, Russia has been attacking, Ukraine. You don't hear as much their government offices, and that's happening in Israel too. And they're very resilient, but it's, kind of shocking that, they weren't aware of what might happen October 7th. Okay, and let me tell you, I've gone back, and this really shocked me. I've been reading a lot of publications in Israel, even prior to Russia's major full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. And even in early February, there are publications in Israel saying, we're very worried that Russia might invade. This is what might happen to our food prices and so on. We rely on half of our wheat from Ukraine. Your children will only have half sandwiches. So they were quite aware. Okay, I wish, most of the world would have been. And also what I found absolutely fascinating is after Russia pulled out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, as I was saying, Ukrainians are very adaptive, agile, very entrepreneurial. The first ship to come and load with grain was actually an Israeli ship on the Danube. Okay, so you see the connections that you wouldn't expect. But we're so interconnected now with the world. And we even had US involved, with planes flying and drones to make sure that the ship was protected.
Right, I want to add to that. Anna is absolutely right. Christina, through history, infrastructure is a gateway to win the war, to lose the war. This includes the Napoleons losing the battle in Waterloo because of the supply chain issues. If you cannot provide food or ammunition to the soldiers, that's the end. So I think both sides know that in this case, to really control your opponent, infrastructure is key. Now, I think as Anna pointed out, that many countries they have already a resilient. They can build a really pivot to new networks, such as Germany. They built a new port to receiving the natural gas. Now, but I think that in terms of the Israel situation is more intricate. That's why, as Anna pointed out, the US actually sent the aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean Sea to monitor the situation at the port. As I told you, if Israel loses those ports, it is over because they have no supply. So therefore, this is a very critical situation. That's why the US need to intercept the missiles from Yemen. So I think that this one, I think the world need to think about infrastructure is key now, but this is not only applied to Israel or even Ukraine, the port, but it's also in the US. We're seeing that some domestic terrorism, they try to attack some of our energy plants, right? So therefore, I think that we also need to think about our infrastructure security, our port security, and whatnot. So this is not only for the war-torn countries, it actually applies around the world.
In fact, the hit on some financial companies recently because of the cyber attacks, what happens someplace else, a war might trigger something else happening here. But just going back to the other, physical infrastructure, Russia recently attacked a dam in Ukraine. And what that did was, just flooded the agricultural lands, right? And so they cannot grow, stuff anymore. And then going to Israel, Chevron has been asked to close a natural gas field. And of the three ports, Haifa, Ashdod, and Ashkelon, only two of them, only one of them, I think, is really barely operational. The other two are at operating at reduced rates or not at all. And so when you look at, and by the way, there's an oil refinery nearby. So again, in that region, the production has been cut. So not just because they're not, getting the gas, from the fields, but also because they're not able to, the factories are shut and refining is not taking place. And then I think my colleagues pointed out that, people, a small percentage, fairly sizable percentage, I would say, of people are now involved in the war. That means they're not going to the factories, they cannot go to the stores. H&M, for example, is still closed, I believe, in Israel. but I just saw this morning that they are opening in Ukraine.
Right.
So there are a number of moving parts. Imagine what happens to that, right? A store opening or being closed down is going to have an impact further down the supply chain. And you're also seeing reports that in factories that are, different parts of the world, people are protesting against H&M and trying to disrupt their production operations. So just a wide variety of effects. So I think it's really critical that the leaders of the world, bring pressure on the bad actors to actually stop or at least contain it to that region. And I think what President Biden is doing in a meeting with President Xi in the sidelines of the next summit, that the APEC summit that they're having, hopefully that'll bring some positive results. So for now, I mean, there is a level 3 travel restriction to China. So hopefully that gets lifted, and then there is more freer flow of people between the countries, and help situation, not just in the South China Sea, but just around the world.
Oh, I fully agree with my colleague just said. I think the meeting on November 15 between President Xi and Biden is a very critical moment to really see if both countries can actually work together to serve as a mediators, not just one country, to work on both sides. So I think that the NATO and US can work with Ukraine, and China can actually either soften the tone and also maybe have some kind of discussion with Russia on one side. Similarly, China also wants to take on the leadership on the global south. So because that's the region that's in conflict between Israel and Hamas, is actually, if it escalates further, it could also affect the slowing economy in China even further. Because that's the China actually, they export over close to $300 billion of goods to the Middle East and North Africa. If that region become unstable, it will really make a big problem. So I think that if China wants to exert the global leadership on that side, because they have brokered a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia in April. So China have a diplomatic dialogues with Iran. So China can do something with Iran. Hopefully that they can actually can stop the funding with the terrorist group like Hamas. So at least to prevent it from further escalating into regional conflict and global conflict. So I think China can play a big role in that. And the US can play a big role with Israel and some other area. So I think these conflicts between all these countries right now, I don't think any one country alone can actually come up with resolutions.
It will require the international community, certainly. And, I think as fellow Ukrainians, we're hoping to see that sooner rather than later, but that we have not been fortunate in that regard. I have two questions for you, but the first is just to follow up. In your estimation, this meeting between Biden and Xi, what would you see as signaling a successful meeting? And then I wanted to follow up to your comment, Dr. Hedegu, about H&M and the protests at H&M, because another huge risk for critical infrastructure, I think all of you know very well, is the insider threat. And given the varying and very opposing opinions on some of these challenges, there are many people all around the world that can do tremendous damage already working inside our critical infrastructure. So the first question is, what would be a successful meeting? What points would you see coming out of that where you'd say, oh, this was really progress? And then the second is just about what you see as the threat of insider threat and what we could be doing about that ahead of time.
So I would say the first thing is probably lowering the temperature, right, between US and China. Just lowering the temperature and highlighting the areas in which there is cooperation already happening, could happen, and then maybe talking about some of the, South China and other issues, Taiwan, all of those things. separately, not in the public domain. I think that just getting the right message out is probably going to be helpful. But then there are small things that like travel restrictions, right? Lifting those, providing more freer flow of people between the two countries, that would be helpful. But in terms of what it's not just H&M, by the way, there are other companies as well, right, that are in the same situation where you got some inside threats from either employees or the community surrounding a factory. Again, I mean, we saw what happened in California. Was it yesterday or day before? A Jewish man was killed in an altercation, or died in an altercation. So again, lowering the temperature everywhere, sending the right message. I think right now, when you look at the rest of the world, especially in the Middle East and other parts of the world, people think US is only siding with Israel and completely ignoring Gaza. But changing the narrative to say that now US is, Israel clearly is an ally, is an important ally that we will not let go. But then also, making sure that we pay attention to the, people who are who don't have food, who don't have shelter, who are in a very dire situation, right? Living in refugee camps. How long can we, we just can't keep bombing our way out of this particular crisis. There has to be very serious dialogue on settlements and stopping the expansion of settlements in the West Bank. I mean, part of the reason why this happened was there was so much focus on the West Bank. They completely took their eye off of the Gaza Strip wall, and that just led to this horrific attack on innocent Israeli people who were at a concert. So I think just sending the message, getting China perhaps and India as well to have Russia toned down and maybe not get involved in the war. And I don't know, the stalemate, I guess, is now that Russia has occupied some parts of eastern Ukraine. Finding a solution to that. I know they've done a lot of atrocities, taking children and brainwashing them, and holding people hostage, and several human atrocities, right, in early part of the war and even now. But we are where we are, and we just need to look towards the future and say, how do we make best of the situation that we currently have, so that the whole world is at peace. I mean, if you look at so many technological and other innovations that are taking place, I think the world is poised to escalate to another higher plateau. But these wars are the ones that are really dampening us. I mean, there are a lot of things we could be doing with climate change, right? A transition to electric vehicles, production using. But one of the things I've been advocating for quite some time is producing things locally rather than having it shipped from tens of thousands of miles away. To the extent that you can, I mean, you can put a 3D printing machine on your desk and produce little parts. You don't have to import them from a place that you don't know that's 10,000 miles away. Or even food production, right? Why do we have to be shipping tomatoes from one part of the country to the other, or one part of the world to the other? Why can't we make them locally? So I think we can focus on artificial intelligence, chip production, just things that better humanity over the long period of time. If we can get these wars to simmer. So I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Well, I think that a lot of people are shocked that we have these wars happening. I mean, I know once once Russia invaded Ukraine, many people, hashtag never again, and yet it's happening again in front of everyone's eyes. So I think it takes more than just hopes and kind of the dreams, but it takes something behind negotiations and international compacts, that when this happens and it threatens the entire food supply chain or energy supply chain, that there has to be something a bit stronger in place. So I don't know if that's being looked at. I think a lot of people are wondering how the war in Ukraine has gone on for 2 years plus, and now with Israel, I think that the international community will have to find a better way to dampen these things, because it affects everyone. But yeah, if you whatever you'd like to add on supply chain and perhaps insider threat, that would be great.
Thank you. This is like a very important conversation, very important insights, extremely, extremely useful. When it comes to Xi, I would like to see perhaps lower tariffs. Many of the tariffs under the Trump administration are still in place. I think that's problematic. And also, as has been so eloquently mentioned already, climate change. We all are living on the same planet together. We're all in this together. We care about, the future of our children, grandchildren, and so forth and so on. And we continue to engage in, more and more of this ecological destruction, not getting away from fossil fuels. So I would like to see more cooperation with China in that dimension. I think they have the power, although they keep on building the coal-fired power plants. There's a lot of, kind of hypocrisy there. Let's do what's best for the planet, and let's start, being more kind to each other, working more closely with each other. And we need to, as Christina, you were mentioning, we need these international organizations to have more heft, to have more clout. Okay, some of them do tremendous work. I would single out, for example, the World Food Program of the UN, but others, do they just vote or have their discussions and nothing gets done while the atrocities continue to be committed, in many parts of the world against innocent civilians and children and women, and it's just not right. And there's genocide happening in so many parts of the world. I thought, that shouldn't be the case anymore. That absolutely needs to stop.
Well, I fully agree with my colleagues. Christina, you really point out very important issues. Right now, the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and also the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it is artificially created. It is not about a rational behavior, it's ideological. So when you have this kind of issues, you cannot talk common sense. So I think that we need international body to exert pressure and also to remind the whole world, these people, they coexist for a long time. They were friends, they were families, they used to live in the same area. So all these boundaries were created artificially. And actually, if we look at a broader picture, the whole world is connected. The world can actually accommodate more people with different religion, with different faiths, different beliefs. But I think that it is the leaders try to actually change the narrative. So I think I hope that this meeting, President Xi and Biden, can lead the world efforts to actually encourage other leaders at the APEC summit to say that enough is enough. We have to stop all this propaganda. No one is winning. Even the stalemate, the potential stalemate in Ukraine is not a good solution. Winter is coming. And I think that this is a very harsh situation. And also that the civilians are both suffering in Israel and Gaza. This has to stop as well. But I think that we need to have a closed door meetings between President Xi and Biden. Because politically speaking, officially they have to hold hold the ground, and they will not compromise. But I think behind closed doors, they will actually lower the temperature to understand the challenges different countries are facing, and United States and China must take on the leadership role to do their part to actually improve world peace. Because without peace, there's no trade. Even you loan the tariffs is not going to work because there's no people, no infrastructure. We don't want that, right? We don't want that. Let's settle the score. We don't want wars. We want to save the planet for future generations. This is what we expect the world leaders to do. In order to do that, the world leaders, including United Nations, need to exert pressures and convince these people to stop it, because we have enough problems already. So in that case, I think that we need to to make the world become so polarized, to actually have more common ground, and actually with compromises, we can all get along. The world is big enough for everybody. Thank you.
So maybe a big signal from the meeting would be if Washington, D.C. got the pandas back.
I fully
Pretty-
agree.
Yeah, I think that as a diplomatic gesture would be kind of a win. And it seems like a silly thing, but the truth is the cultural exchange, the human exchange, all of that exchange that had been happening, you're seeing that come to a close. And the sad part is you're seeing these conflicts truly target civilians much more than ever before. You saw that was the intent of Hamas in Israel to attack civilians. And in Ukraine, you see Russia obliterating apartment buildings. They're not, these are not military anything. And so that is not just concerning. It really needs, it must stop, but we're all talking about it and hoping that our voices make a difference. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us today. We'd love to follow up with you in the future. And certainly if you have any contributions during Critical Infrastructure Protection Month, we welcome them. Thank you for your work. And we sure will look for you continued on the news as thought leaders. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Christina.
for
Thank
having
you,
us.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.